Hashivenu, Hashivenu. Return again, return again. Return us to days like before. Return again, return again. Return us to days like before. Why aren't we talking about how afraid we all are? These days are not like the days before. I am scared all the time. Every day I ruminate on the loss. I know I'm not the only one. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sums up the state of our age as a time of great peril. Our climate is heating up. Challenges for infrastructure, public health, political stability, and human social services and management are more difficult than they have ever been in recorded lifetimes. Elie Wiesel tells a story about a conversation between humans and God. The human complains to God of the challenges of living. God replies with a complaint of God's own. Try running the universe and all creation sometime. You just have to worry about your job and your family. I have to worry about all the planets, galaxies, creatures, every aspect of existence. True, the human retorted, but you have all the time and total power. The problem is not having a job or a family, but meeting all the demands of being human in the boundaries of our lifetimes. God and the human continued talking, and they couldn't come to an agreement as to what was the more difficult position. So the human proposed an experiment. God, why don't you and I change places, just for 1 second, just to see what it's like? God demurred, but the human persisted, and eventually God agreed. God entered into the human world, and the human ascended God's throne. The story ends here. Having ascended the throne, the human has yet to relinquish it. So God remains among us, God's wings clipped, living in the limited world of humanity, and we remain ruled by our own error and folly. If you're like me, every day you wake up and breathe the morning air, hoping it stays clean enough for just a bit longer. There is a press upon your heart, a tear and a tear in your soul. As Yeats writes, things fall apart. The center does not hold. Our world slides ever backward, challenging our faith in progress and calling into question our ideals. There is a movie many of you may have seen. Though it is a love story and a Pixar cartoon, it is also a picture of an apocalyptic, environmentally ravaged Earth. In the movie WALL-E, we get a convincing glimpse of a world all but devoid of life. Our world, after it has been used up, after it has literally been trashed. Now, we live in a world crumbling from the effects of climate change. It will only get worse. Our cities will be underwater. Fires will ravage our homes. Food will become scarce. Pandemics will become rampant. Armed conflict is expected to rise at least 40%, even if we manage to keep the Earth's temperature from rising 2 degrees. People will die too soon, victims of heat waves, droughts, floods, war, malaria. Wiesel wasn't completely correct, though. There isn't only one throne. There are two. God is on God's throne, but we are also on a throne that wields power. And maybe it was the hubris of its glory that led us to this moment of crisis. But we are in charge of this now. Though God may infuse us with strength, hope, spiritual vision, it is up to us to respond to this crisis. Former journalist Molly Wood tells a story of Hurricane Ida in New Orleans. When the storm hit, about 20,000 people remained in the city. One of them, Devin DeWolf, describes the days that followed the storm. We were without power for about 10 days. Every day it was easily over 110 degrees. That is really challenging when you can't cool down anywhere. Living without air conditioning, it can be fatal, potentially. Unlike many of his neighbors, Devin did not lose power. His house runs on batteries and solar panels. It was the only one in the neighborhood with power. Devin's house became a neighborhood charging station, and he literally helped save lives. DeWolf explained, Mr. Roy needed an oxygen machine, so I ran an extension cord from my house to his to take care of that. I've got another elderly neighbor, and I hooked up his refrigerator during the daylight when I have solar. And then on the front porch, I just put an extension cord connected to a power strip, and just a little sign, phone charging station, it said, open 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. And easily, hundreds of people came by to charge their devices. As the community around him waited for aid, Devin provided what he had. And in the end, aid never came. What he was able to offer was all that saved his neighbors. But we don't live in New Orleans. We don't live in Puerto Rico or Pakistan. We may feel sad about climate disasters. We may feel guilty. But for many of us, the horror seems off in the distance. For many of us, it is a story only of what will be. Author Jonathan Safran Foer beseeches us. We do not have the luxury of living in our time. We cannot go about living our lives as if they were only ours. In a way that was not true for our ancestors, the lives we live will create a future that cannot be undone. So, though many of us will not live to see the worst of this, our children, our children's children, and their children surely will. And for many young Beth-Omnics, for some in this very room as we celebrate this new year, the destruction and devolution are already real. What do? We start by being in conversation with one another about our moral responsibilities. We ask, what do we owe one another? What do we owe those who will come after us? What do the older generations need to say and do for the younger? What do the younger need to do for those who will come after? I talked to some young Beth-Omnics, starting to engage this conversation myself. One of the college students I spoke with told me, I really hope that our communities can become a lot more interconnected. I really hope that there's an increased level of communal responsibility. We are going to have to take care of ourselves and each other. One Beth Am teen told me, "I fear Earth becoming uninhabitable. Maybe not when I'm an adult, but when my kids are adults. Is it morally ethical to bring kids into a world that is dying? I fear that we won't be able to do anything about it. I feel powerless." A Beth Am college student told me, "I fear as I look to the future. I know that speaking as myself and my household, that our family, whatever the budget is, it will have to be inclusive of prescriptions for inhalers or medicines or heat stroke, hospital visits, and more adverse health management. This is already happening to me and my friends now, and it's going to get worse," he said. A Beth Am teen told me, "Right now, the earth is changing at a more rapid pace than it ever has in my lifetime. If I am already able to notice changes from when I was 8, what kind of changes am I going to see in the next 50 years? It all makes her angry and sad. It makes her feel exasperated. When I speak with millennial members of our Beth Am community, those from 23 to 42, they tell me that they fear that it's already too late to fix the planet. They are frustrated. We are long past individual responsibility, one told me. It's no longer the case that changing a light bulb or taking a shorter shower is going to make any kind of difference. What we need is large reform-type changes. I am angry," she continued. "We've known about this for a long time, certainly longer than I have been alive, and it's still a problem." Many millennials envision a future and a present very different from our past. They see bigger, larger, more frequent storms, constant water damage. A millennial shared with me that he fears we might be getting to the point of it becoming too late to do anything about the earth. In other words, we have reached a tipping point of global warming. He told me, "How many once-in-a-lifetime situations have we gone through in the last few years? It seems like we have a storm of the century every year. Summer was one continuous heat wave. The seasons are going to get worse." This is the world we live in. Hayom. Today. These days of awe call us to think back on our past deeds. Some are personal, deriving from intimate, internal decisions we made. Some are communal, pointing to the world and social norms with which we have been complicit. If we are called to live lives of justice, if as Jews we are caretakers of the earth, if made in God's image we are duty-bound to alleviate suffering, how should we move forward? How should we proceed in this complicated morass of deeds and policies and systems? Everything is at stake. But what if we do is not enough? What if what we do is not enough? In discussing Pharaoh's decree to kill all the firstborn Jewish boys, Rabbi Jonah Pesner points out the moral courage of Shifra and Puah, the midwives who refused to heed Pharaoh's command. They could not have averted all the suffering that was to come in Jewish households. But contrasted with the complicity of the Egyptians, we see how our moral responsibility calls us to always do something in the face of injustice. Foyer extends this thinking. He writes, "When radical change is needed, many argue that it is impossible for individual actions to incite it, so it is futile for anyone to try. This is exactly the opposite of the truth. He continues, the impotence of individual action is a reason for everyone to try. He gives the example of being at a ball game when the crowd does a wave. No one person can make a wave, but no wave happens without all the individuals. And waves do happen. In history, when we have had significant changes in human behavior and social norms, it was not always because we were motivated by our values each and every time we engaged in the new behavior. I throw away trash because I throw away trash. I put on my seatbelt without thinking. People don't smoke in restaurants. We would be shocked if they did. Throwing away trash, putting on seatbelts, creating smoke-free environments. These are what we do. But the same was not true in the first decades of my life. These things had to become the social norm. So how do we make our climate response not about good feelings or best intentions, many of which do very little to stem the tide or alleviate the warming, but rather about making the way we move through the world what we all do that stewards the earth, the social norm. In explaining the concept of long path, that is, widening our lens as we move through the world, seeing our decisions and our motivations communally and intergenerationally, author and futurist Ari Wallach says, what will get us through this time is thinking expansively and collectively. In other words, we have to make the wave both by habitually participating in it. After all, it's what we do at a ball game. And thinking intentionally about how what we do impacts not just the next person in the wave, but the whole of the wave together. We have limited time on this earth. This is one of the themes of the Days of Awe. Maybe we have done deeds of kindness, acts of salvation. Maybe we could have done more. But still, despite our ideals, our values, our best intentions, our world is threatened as never before. Yet today is a new year. What are you going to do with the rest of the time you have? What can you do even as you will never see the full results of your moral labors? I have 4 children. What can I do so that the roughly 12,000 descendants I could have in 200 years will live a better life? What will I do or refrain from doing that will imperil or strengthen their living? What will you do for the inheritors of the earth? We all need to begin by having these difficult conversations. What is your plan for having a conversation about climate change with a person of a different generation? What will you discuss together about how we build a sustainable future? What actions will you take to become part of a communal wave? Will you find manageable ways to help us get off fossil fuels? Will you help reverse our dependence on mass industrial production? Will you demand regulations on projects that negatively impact our environment? Will you stop buying foods that are factory farmed? Will you give up meat altogether? Will you give up your gas vehicle? Will you access sustainable energy sources in place of non-renewable fuel? What will you do that will make a big difference and will require all of us? When? When will you do so? Now is the time to decide. A Chinese proverb teaches the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Choni had to sleep 70 years to see a tree flourish in a new generation. How long will we sleep? What kind of ancestor will each of us choose to be?